So the realm of authenticity, very, very important to me. This dates back to my childhood. So I just want to tell you all, give you all a sense of my personal story, which would have been, I'm 63 now, and I sometimes marvel at being able to stand on the stage and tell this story because when I was 20, and if you had asked me would I ever dare tell you the story that I'm about to tell you, I would have told you you were absolutely crazy. I grew up as a gay kid who I hated being gay as a kid. I just absolutely hated it. As a young kid, there was something. I grew up, born in 1955. I came of age right in the mid-'60s or so. I grew up in a community where gay people just were not. There was a low tolerance for gay folks, and so I deduced very quickly that it just wasn't safe. There were kids in my neighborhood, older kids than me, who were outwardly gay and who were, it's called brutalized, beaten up. I just couldn't understand what it was about me that would cause ire and consternation and anger and frustration in so many people. Kids are very intuitive. I knew when I was 11 or 12 that I was gay. I certainly did by the time I was 13 or 14. But I also realized that there was something about me that disturbed the peace. I just didn't like disturbing the peace. I didn't like the idea that I was something that caused other people to be uncomfortable. When I grew up in elementary school, in primary school, we had a grade that we had on our report card. We had this. It was called citizenship. There was math, there was science, there was geography, there was citizenship. And citizenship was how you conducted yourself, how well behaved you were. And I prided myself on getting an A in citizenship. My mental model about not disturbing the peace started when I was a little kid because I liked to get an A in citizenship. Those kids who were quiet, those kids who were obedient, those kids who spoke only when spoken to, who otherwise remained quiet and was just really obedient. And that was really important to me. I liked being the obedient kid. So the notion of disturbing the peace was absolutely incongruent with what I considered to be a good citizen, my notion at 7 years old in the second grade of being a good citizen. There was a kid who, it was in my class, his name was Wendell Fitzgerald was his name, and Wendell was a noisy kid. He was just noisy. You had any noisy kids in your life? He was just he couldn't sit still. Wendell would ask a lot of questions in class. He would always raise his hand. He was always raising his hand, and he was inquisitive. I didn't know what it was called then. Now, as an adult, it's called divergent thinking, and that is that some of us are wired to be divergent thinkers, where we push our thinking out through inquiry, so we're more naturally inquisitive. I think Wendell was a divergent thinker, and that this was a kid who, he used to get whacked all the time, just paddled. This was back in the days when you could actually paddle kids. And Wendell, he wasn't a bad kid, he wasn't disrespectful, he was just inquisitive. He was just noisy. Wendell just was not afraid to ask why. And that brought him a lot of consternation, it really did. He would come back from the principal's office and we would say to Wendell, why don't you just be quiet? Why do you do this to yourself? Why don't you just sit quietly and be a good citizen? You'll get an A in citizenship, Wendell, if you just stop asking so many questions. But Wendell couldn't help himself. He was just naturally inquisitive. I never really tracked to see what happened with Wendell in his life, but it always stuck with, because I took those mental models of being a kid who prided himself on keeping things peaceful, and I took that into adulthood. So when I realized that I was gay, I thought that it was really, the requisite was on me to be able to turn down the volume on my persona in order not to disturb the peace. Heck, I grew up in church where, on sermons in church where I would hear about the evils of homosexuality, that it was a sin. Like many African Americans, I grew up in church. I was in church every Sunday. Church was important to me. God was important to me. And I'm trying to reconcile in my 12-year-old brain this notion that I'm offensive to God. That's a hard thing to get your head around when you're 12 years old, when you want to love God, but you're very concerned that there's something about you that's offending God. I mean, that's deep stuff. And so I learned, just like a lot of people in my generation, that the best thing to do would be to turn down the volume on that. Just sort of put it on hold. Just put it on mute. That I deduced from family gatherings and social events that people were just a lot more comfortable when I showed up with a girl. Just a lot more comfortable. The anxiety went down. I mean, kids are intuitive, and so you walk into a room, you're 16 years old, and you walk into a room with a girl, and everybody goes, a sigh of relief. It's sort of like you don't need a rocket scientist to be able to tell you that there's a correlation between you giving people what they need to see and your own sense of again, being a good citizen. So I decided when I was in my late teens that I would live a closeted lifestyle. I just thought it was something that you could put on hold. It was the 60s. It was the big movement in the States, social reform, civil rights, etc. I was black and gay. I couldn't do anything about being black. That I had to deal with. But being gay, I thought, okay, I could put a mute button on that one and just hold off. I didn't want to bear two crosses. At that age, and so I gave people what I thought they needed. I gave people what I thought they wanted. I thought people wanted me to be straight. I thought people wanted me to be this sort of the representation of the iconic, perfect citizen, if you will. I met a wonderful woman, Kim. We met in church, as a matter of fact. And we married when I was 24. And I just decided that being gay was something that it was just sort of optional in my life, and that I could continue to sort of pray it away was my strategy back then. Kim and I had two daughters, Leslie and Alexis. My daughters are 36 and 34 now. I'm telling you the story, not that I would change anything in it. I love my daughters. I love my grandsons. I have two grandsons, Churchill, who is 6, and Dean, who is 3. They're coming to New Zealand for the first time for Christmas to spend Christmas with Poppy here in New Zealand. I wouldn't change a thing about my story, but I tell my story to make the case that you can go to a very unhealthy place sometimes if you aren't comfortable with who you are. We married. I got my PhD in clinical psychology. I wanted to be a psychologist. I went to work in a mental health system in Indiana. I worked in that system for 3 years, and I decided that I wanted to be a manager. I wanted to be a manager. The managers in the system were, they had better offices. They were, they weren't seeing, I was seeing like 18 patients a day in my realm. The managers were seeing like 7 or 8, and they were managing the rest of us. And I just wanted a piece of that. Wanted to get a feel for what that was all about. And a number of people, so I looked at options, and a number of people said, Harold, you have your PhD. There's a critical shortage of medical service officers in the US Armed Forces, the 3 branches of the military. And so why don't you consider that? Why don't you consider actually going into the US military, one of the branches? You can get some management experience as an officer. You can run a clinic, and then you can get out after 3 years and go back into the mental health system and be a manager. So that's what I did. Look, I knew that it was illegal to be gay in the US military in 1986. But that wasn't an issue for me because I wasn't gay. So I went through the process and went through the application process, went through the selection committee, and went down to Indiana, went down to Indianapolis to meet with Captain Simpson, who was the recruiter, and sitting there, and I'm filling out the application, and this was question 13 on the application to become an officer in the US military? Question 13. Who would have imagined that on a job application? Imagine that question on a job application in the year 2018. Clearly, there's a right or wrong answer up there. There was actually a box that said, if yes, please provide details. That wasn't going to go down. I ticked no, but it always stands out for me because I had denied being gay all my life. Oh, I had been poked and poked and poked from, as a kid growing up, just poked and poked and poked. But I got good at denying that I was gay. That wasn't the issue. The issue was, for the very first time in my life, I was being asked to check a box to officially deny who I was. And I tell you what, that stayed with me. I'd never been asked before to sign away my integrity with my signature under that. So that, it was a reckoning, but I figured I could hold my nose for 3 years, go in and really, make something out of this. I loved every part of being an officer. I loved everything about being an officer. I didn't anticipate that this whole notion of leadership would resonate with me so well. I took it seriously. I learned about the Air Force. I learned about the wing. I went out across the base. I didn't want to be like Hawkeye and MASH on that show MASH, the medical service officers. Not at all. I was a real officer, and I wanted to convey that. And so I steeped myself deep in knowledge around the Air Force, the wing that I was assigned to. And in 1988, I did something that no other medical service officer had done at Myrtle Beach Air Force Base. I won Company Grade Officer of the Year, which I took great pride in because I invested a lot. I really wanted to just really immerse myself fully in the experience. Be careful when you lie about who you are, because it will take you into the eye of a storm. And little did I know that award would then prompt the chief psychologist in the US Air Force to call me up about 2 weeks later and say to me, Captain Hillman, we realized that you were going to get out after 3 years, but we'd like to extend an invitation for you to come teach at the US Airforce Academy for 4 years, which will mean that you'll put on the rank of major and extend your tour. And Kim and I talked about it and decided, let's do it. Let's go for it. Be careful when you lie about who you are. It will take you deeper into the eye of the storm. Off I went to the academy. I loved it. Teaching leadership now. 4,000 cadets, all who were going to be officers, roughly around the age of 22 or 23. We didn't use the word management in the Air Force. That wasn't a word. It wasn't in our lexicon. Leadership was what we talked about. And I loved every bit of it. I immersed myself fully and deeply in it. And in 1992, I won Outstanding Military Educator at the US Air Force Academy. And I tell you this to basically make the point that on the outside, I was doing well, by all accounts, in terms of sort of recognition for a job well done. Again, immersing myself fully into the role of an officer, which I really loved. Well, wouldn't you know it, in 1992, Bill Clinton was elected president of the United States, and like all the Democratic Party's candidates in 1992 who ran for president, they ran on the vow that if elected, they would remove the ban on gay people being able to serve openly in the US military. That ban had been in place for decades, been in place forever, basically. Prior to World War II, it had been illegal to be gay in the US military, so you were imprisoned for 3 years if you were outed as a gay soldier. Prior to that, after World War II, it became a psychiatric disorder. And in line with the American psychiatric, prior to 1973, homosexuality was a psychiatric disorder. Not sure if many of you all realize that, and it wasn't until 1973 when the American Psychiatric Association removed homosexuality as a psychiatric disorder. So then, there went the military's last bastion of hope. They could no longer criminalize gay people. They could no longer discharge them as being psychiatrically ill. So then the argument was that somehow gay people serving with straight people is going to ruin the morale and the esprit of the troops. And the American public had had enough of that, basically, and had started to put a bit more heat and pressure on the military to open its thinking a bit more. And so when Bill Clinton was elected, he formed this commission led by Secretary of Defense Colin Powell. This was commissioned in January of 1993. And that's when General Hosmer at the Air Force Academy called me into his office and said, "Captain Hillman, congratulations. Because of your outstanding service, we're sending you to Washington, D.C. to serve on the commission to determine if gay people can serve openly in the United States military." And there I went. There I went. There I went. I was the real deal. I was the imposter. I was behind that mask. I mean, we were sequestered in Georgetown for 3 months. We were in civilian attire. It was all very hush-hush, secretive. And heck, the very first day I showed up, I was convinced I'd have to walk through a scanner. You know, that they were going to make us walk through a scanner that would start beeping. I tell you what, it was the most confronting experience ever. We were told on the second day by the 3 generals and the admiral who chaired the panel that, and what they said to us was, "Ladies and gentlemen, there were 44 guys and 3 women, and they said to us, this ban is not going to be removed under our watch, and we need to make that clear right away." So I knew within 2 days that I was about to participate in a process that was going to be a sham of a consultative process where pro-gay and anti-gay groups came in to petition the committee to make their case about why people like me should or shouldn't be able to serve openly, and I'm sitting there ostensibly as a straight officer going through this process. I heard it all. I heard it all. It was very confronting to hear people come in and present research about gay people ruining the esprit de corps, still being, forget what the APA says, it's still a psychiatric illness. They came in with studies around genetic deficiencies. They came in with they hit it from every angle. And there I sat, sitting there, perpetuating the mythology of people who, just perpetuating the mythology through my silence. When pro-gay groups came in, the generals and the admiral made a point of putting a bowl of fruit on the table in front of them, a symbolic gesture there, just a joke for all of us sitting around the table there. Fruit for the fruits was the gesture there. And that bowl of fruit wasn't lost on me as I sat there watching openly gay people come in and make the case for why folks like me should be able to serve. And I sat there perpetuating the mythology through my silence. Silence is not golden sometimes. Sometimes silence actually perpetuates the mythology that keeps us more narrowly focused. One pro-gay group came in and made the case. They said, "Respectfully, sirs, roughly 13 to 18% of your military is already gay. So, it's not like it's not like our starting point is from 0 here, so let's be real about this." And after they left, the admiral, I'll never forget this, the admiral pounded the table. He was furious because there had been groups who had come in before to make the case. This is not, there's already gay people in the military. And the admiral after they left, he stood up and he pounded the table. He pounded it hard. And he said, "Look, I'm tired of hearing these statistics. These stats that they keep coming into." He said, "I've been in the military for 35 years, and I can tell you that I have never met anyone gay in the military." That's what the admiral said. And I was just sitting right there. And I just, those 15 minutes of fame that you fantasize in your head, what would you do if you could play it back over again? And I just wanted to stand up and go, "Well, girlfriend, this is your lucky day." But I didn't. I was a good citizen. I prided myself on getting an A in citizenship. My role was to sit quietly. Eventually, the end result of that commission was don't ask, don't tell. Don't ask, don't tell, don't pursue. I felt like shit at the end of that. I had gone through a 3-month process, and I contributed to a decision that in some cases was probably worse than the ban itself. Because the policy was now, okay, we're going to call off the witch hunts and we're not going to have these, big exercises to out gay people in the military anymore. So if you're gay in the military, it's okay to be gay as long as you don't tell anyone you're gay. You can be gay as long as you aren't gay. That was the policy. And I thought, what have I done? What have I contributed to? In terms of this outstanding service and these decorations and those types of things, when we all got back to our bases, we were all awarded the Meritorious Service Medal for outstanding service to the United States. It's a big deal in the military to get a medal. There's no bonuses, there's no discretionary funds and those types of things. A medal is everything. To have 1,000 of your peers pull together in an auditorium to have that medal pinned on me. And I tell you what, that was the most confronting day of my life. As I stood there on that stage with General Hosmer pinning that medal on my uniform. As I said, I grew up in church. Scripture is very important to me, and a scripture resonated with me that day on the stage. For what shall it profit you to gain the whole world and yet lose your own soul? Is there anything worth more than your soul? And it was on that day that I decided that I had gone too far in terms of fitting in, that I had lost the plot, that I had lost perspective on what was required to be a good citizen. And that's when I decided that I needed to become a whole person. 2 days later, I had a conversation with Kim in what was the most sort of daunting conversation that I'll ever have with another human being. She's a lovely woman. We are still wonderful friends, and she handled it so well, loving me. My biggest fear was that for me to be real with other people would cause disconnect. And what I realized in the moment was that when you give people your whole self, the essence of connection is actually enhanced. A day later, I went in and talked to my commander, Colonel Buron, a fighter pilot in the US Air Force, and sat down with him and said, "Sir, I cannot stay in an organization that will not allow me to be myself." And Colonel Buron said to me, "Captain Hillman, why do you think I sent you to serve on the commission?" I think there were some things that you needed to just sort of get across in that respect there. People who I thought would turn actually connected. It is an important thing because I just make the point that once I let go of that fear that I was not going to be acceptable to people and actually just gave them who I was able to enhance connection. I could feel it viscerally.